Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Isaac. Just by the virtue, because we're Isaac, you can expect this daily to be variance filled, and you know, we wouldn't like it any other way. But if you did play your daily, a lot of the decisions that you make, especially with the D6, can end up really either rewarding you or punishing you. And in this particular case, I feel like the very first choice on when to use the D6 might have had a bigger impact on the run than most runs, or at least most decisions that I've made throughout this entire ordeal. And the main reason was, should we reroll the leech? And that might seem like a very obvious answer, or a question and then an answer, but of course, why wouldn't you reroll it? It's a pretty bad item. You visited or you found it right next to the treasure room, so it's a better idea to save your reroll for the boss room, because you never know if you're gonna get enough charges so you can actually do both. Or maybe should you save both of the items, not pick anything up, and only decide afterwards. And it's a tough one, because I feel like there are a lot of variables that we have to consider. And the first one is definitely, will we have enough charges, or at least will we have enough chance of rerolling another item? So can we afford to reroll again, and will we get enough charges to reroll another item? That would obviously be the ideal case scenario, but you never really know how many rooms there are gonna be. And obviously with the big rooms giving 2 charges, that can increase your chances a little bit. So if you see any undiscovered rooms which happen to be big, that gives you an indication that maybe that's a good way to go. But besides that, you don't really know, and there's no guarantee whether you can get 2 rerolls or just 1. So if you know that you're not gonna get another reroll, or at least you're not certain, then it becomes a much more interesting decision. So do I reroll this item now and hope that I'm gonna get another charge to reroll the boss item, or do I save this item now and then reroll the boss item, hoping there's gonna be something better? Of course, what I would advise you in most cases, it just depends on the quality of the item. So something like the Lich is an okay item. It's a passive item which doesn't really inhibit you, but it also isn't too powerful. It does have a lot of niche effects, and it can deal some damage, and it's just nice to have a passive familiar which kind of works independently from you, and that's always a good thing. But besides that, it doesn't do much damage, and even if it does, sometimes it heals you, and that can be actually quite detrimental, especially if you have something like the Whore of Babylon. So I do find that the Lich, while being a good familiar, is not too terribly amazing. And in this particular one, I did feel like it's a better idea for me to just reroll it and hope that I'm gonna get another charge. My idea basically was, because the boss room items are generally much more localized, there are less of them, which means they're more concentrated, which just feels, or at least it makes me feel like there are more good items in that particular pool. I guess that could also be used as an argument as to why we should reroll that pool in case if we get a bad one, but I just felt like there was a higher chance of us actually getting a good item out of the boss room, and combine that with the fact that we might get another reroll that just kind of pushed me in that direction. And obviously when we got Robo Baby, I didn't pick it up immediately, because still Robo Baby is not a stellar item. It's a good familiar, obviously, with penetrative shots. It shoots through rock, it shoots multiple enemies, those are all very good things, but it just doesn't do much damage. It doesn't really change your run, if that makes sense. So for that reason, I did decide to leave it until the end of the floor, maybe hoping another battery charge would show up, because if it did, I would decide to reroll it again, because it's just not that good. But in the case, if you just don't get anything, I decided to pick it up, because having another familiar which just deals more damage, or maybe some additional damage on top of yours, can be quite useful, I guess, especially against some rooms which have enemies hiding behind the rocks. It doesn't have a lot of usabilities later past the 4th or maybe the 5th floor, but up until that point, it can prove to be quite useful. So it was a very interesting decision, and in some sense quite a conundrum, but I feel like I made the right choices, at least for my playstyle. Obviously, I know if you're the kind of player which prefers to reroll the boss room items, because they tend to have more influential stats, damage, range, tier rate, speed, and any of those things are obviously very good to have. And I feel like I should do some math and just kind of categorize all the items from the boss rooms and all the items from the treasure rooms, and then finally see whatever, or not see, but I guess just quantize in some sense, just to see which items that you get by rerolling, or at least which treasure pool or item pool has better items in it on average. And I feel like that would be, again, just a very hard problem to do, because it's very hard to say, oh, this item is good, because there's a lot of items that have effects which are usually not just straight up good. Obviously you have some, but in most cases they maybe give you a benefit and maybe take something away from you. So for example, how are you gonna treasure, or how are you gonna compare items like, let's say, okay, Mom's Knife is a bad example, but Okay, let's say Robot Baby and Monstro, a Lil Monstro. And in this particular case, you know, you can say Lil Monstro is better because it deals more damage, and in this case you would be correct, but it can't shoot over walls, or maybe Lil Monstro can, so that was a bad example. But just in essence, it's hard to compare two different items to each other and say which one is better, because they're both situational, and they both depend on the type of the run that you're having, and obviously a lot of it relies on variance and just what kind of rooms you go up against. So it's not an answer that you can answer very easily, and I think Explosivo, bringing the case in point, is a very good example of that, because against most, or at least some bosses, Explosivo can be very good, and because you tend to face, I guess, or fight a very select number few of bosses throughout the course of an entire run, so you know, you fight like 10, maybe 20, 12, 20 bosses or whatever. It really depends on which bosses you encounter. There are so many bosses in the game that some of them are very nice to kill with Explosivo, and some of them have a lot of jumping and teleporting abilities, and if that happens, obviously Explosivo can be really terrible. So if you just have some form of knowing, but obviously you can't know, if you did know, then you could maybe say, okay, this is a good item in this particular case, but because we don't know the future, and because we don't know whatever or which rooms we'll be facing, it does turn out to be a very situational item. So I guess how you could look at it is it good in the average case scenario? But then again, that's very hard to determine as well, because there are so many different room variations. We're not really sure how exactly the generation works, or maybe what the odds are of particular rooms or bosses showing up. So again, that would be a very hard decision to answer. I feel like there are too many variables to say this item is better than this one, just because of how situational they are. And a lot of the items, I would say most items in the game, are designed with that in mind. While they might be good in some situations, they might end up being really, really bad in others. Or usually it's the other way around. They're usually bad in a lot of situations, but they can be good in very select few. And that's obviously what gives the game longevity, and what makes it so deep to understand and to learn, and obviously what also makes us feel better whenever we can pull off a combo that's usually not as good. But I guess this is just a general harp on game design, how this game was designed, and it's really not here or there. But you can see that this particular run did go in a very interesting direction ever since from the start. Of course, because of the D6, you can expect a lot of different outcomes to come from this run, but in this particular case, I got Anti-Grav, which is an item I usually don't shy away from, just because it does allow you to break the tear cap. It also does increase some of your tear rate, so it's an overall a DPS upgrade. It's also pretty good against most enemies. It does allow you to maybe kill some, like the skeleton, the Knight guys, I think they're called Knights. It does allow you to kill them without ever having to go behind them, because if you just leave your tears suspended in the air, they just walk into you and they actually do take damage. So that's a pretty efficient way to get rid of them. But it's also good against enemies which charge you down, just because that means you don't really have to aim your shots, you just have to walk in the same line that the enemy is walking, and you're pretty much guaranteed to hit them. So it's an okay item. I wouldn't call it stellar, but it does have a lot of fun synergies. For that reason, I did decide to pick it up. And after that one, the run kind of defined itself. We got a lot of the items which complemented it, so we got a lot of tear rate upgrades. We got the Screw, we got Binky, and that was already enough to put us at 4. Later on we got Sacred Heart, which is an item that never shows up, so for the fact that it showed up in this run is quite remarkable. We also got Magic Marsh, so overall a nice assortment of items, and the run really did take quite some time to get going. You did notice I was at the 30th minute when I was exiting the Womb 2 floor, no, not the Womb 2 floor, the Depths 2 floor, so I actually beat Mom at 30 minutes, which is the timestamp for going to Hush, obviously. So I was really late on this particular one, but it was also because I did take a lot of time. There's always that decision that needs to be made. When do I start taking my time to try to get just as strong as possible, so I'll have an easier time going later into the game, or when is the time to rush and try to get to boss rush and Hush and try to get a lot of points that way. And I felt like because of how weak this run was, just having base damage essentially with anti-grav and some tier upgrades really isn't enough for me to say I'm gonna have a good time when I get into the later stages of the game, especially because we were going to Shoal. Shoal is a pretty difficult floor, especially against Mega Satan and things like that. You can imagine fighting the leeches overall with a high shot speed is annoying because your tears bounce them around, and when that happens they can run into you accidentally. You take some damage, which is not really exciting all in all, but it's one of those things which really has to be carefully considered. And I feel like in this particular one it did pay off for me to go via this route and just kind of explore as much as possible to try to find the items, and because of that I think I found a lot of the items which actually ended up benefiting me. Now this is not a clear-cut scenario. It's never known, like I said before, you never can know the future, and you can't know if it's gonna pay out. And I know a lot of people in this particular one found Bumbo, and that would have been definitely helpful. And considering a lot of people say that it carried this run, I feel like it would have been a nice benefit to our arsenal of weapons that we have, but it didn't really strike me in that way, and it's just one of those runs that really takes a little bit of a while to get going, and early on there's just nothing, if you were kind of paying attention, or if you're playing the daily yourself, you know that when you start rerolling those items, there really was nothing good that came out of it. It had one of those things which is kind of messed up, that if you do take damage intentionally on the second floor, then the third floor Devil Deal has Brimstone, and that's a bit of a bummer, obviously, because basically you're rewarded for playing badly, and there's no way of knowing that the third floor Devil Deal is gonna be better, because in most cases scenario you want to get that Devil Deal on the second floor, if not for any other reason to get that Devil Precedent or get that Angel Chance to get later on, and obviously both of those cases are gonna net you with more points on average, except in the cases where the third floor Devil Deal has a better item overall. Like in this case, it has Brimstone, and it's one of those things which, again, you can't really predict or go into the future, which I guess is the theme of this daily in some sense, that you really can't know what's gonna happen. Everything is so situational, and everything does have its own effect and accord, and for that reason, there's really not knowing if what you're doing is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. What you can do is play to your heart's content, and obviously, I think the only thing we can really do in this case is have fun, and I'm trying to do exactly that. And having Sacred Heart, Explosivo, and 3 tier delay or 4 tier delay at the end was pretty exciting. So overall, it was actually a pretty enjoyable run once you get through that initial hump. So if you had the same experience, I hope you did, because I feel like it's one of those runs which does allow you to see the synergies of Isaac. It makes you remember why you enjoyed the game in the first place. It's not for the blank heart and the Yara rune trying to break the game. It's not for the Forget Me Now and farming items and consumables to get as high score as possible. It's just for the fun synergies which allow you to pretty much melt enemies instantly. And I hope you saw that excitement in my video, and if you played the daily yourself, that you experienced it as well. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.